So good afternoon, everybody. Hope you guys are enjoying this first day of the conference, that you're having very productive meetings. Today we have a very special guest. Actually, for me, it's a huge honor to be making this introduction. Actually, I remember Montezano just when he joined the bank and was one of the most promising talents that we had hired that year, focusing on credit. And after being 13 years, our partner, a very dear friend, today is now the president of BNDS. And I still remember clearly the day he sent me a message, said, "I need to talk to you." And I thought it was some regular business issue. And we get into one of the small meeting rooms and he said, "Listen, I've been called for a mission. I think it's time for me to give back to my country. I really believe in Paulo Guedes. I really believe in the president and on the project they're proposing. I think I can make a difference, so I want to go." And of course, we were surprised and we tried to convince him out of it, but we saw we couldn't. And today, I think the results are here as citizens. I think both Montezano and the economic team are doing a great job repositioning the country, repositioning the economic policy. And he's going to talk a bit to you about what he's been doing at Bndes, what are the plans for that. But once again, it's a huge honor to welcome on the stage Montezano, who later will be moderated in a panel by Eduardo Guardia, our CEO of Asset Management, and who we believe was one of the responsibles for putting the country back on track in 2016 when he went to participate in the government, leaving the path a bit easier for Montezano and team to come in. So with no further ado, Montezano, please.
So thank you, Bob. A special thanks to all my former partners that are here today. Thank you for the invitation to be here speaking about our country, to be speaking about Brazil. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss this beautiful and lovely topic. I'll present a very simple presentation, and we split in 3 topics. Firstly, I'd like to present our view and why we think we're living a very special moment in our economy. I think we're living a tipping moment for Brazil, and I'll present you why. Secondly, how do we position BNDS' critical role on this economic and social agenda? And lastly, just as a snapshot, I'll present the overall figures of our divesting pipeline. We believe we have the largest divesting pipeline globally, and then I'll present a few figures on that. As Bobby just said in his introduction, thank you for the beautiful words, I honestly and truly believe that we're living a tipping moment in our history. And Bob and my partners, that's why I decided to leave the bank. After 13 years of a lot of good moments, lessons learned, well-lived moments that I'll never forget. And I'm very thankful for all those history that I'll carry in my mind. And I decided to change my life and dedicate my energy, my tools, and my time to help Brazil, to work for Brazil, and to be back in Brazil. And in this presentation today, I would like to explain the rationale behind that. And being very honest, I think that the scenario that I had in my mind when I took this decision is proving to be stronger than the initial figures. And I'd like to share with all of you why and how we're going to make it happen. Just 1 second. Okay, so that's the agenda. I just mentioned that, the 3 topics, Brazilian as a whole, BNDS, and the pipeline of assets. And before speaking about Brazil economy itself, let's just remind, I don't know how many foreigners we have here, but the size and the scale of our country. And when you mention the disruption technology that is all around, it's all about scale. So our country will be, and is already being, one of the most affected in the good sense from this technology disruption. So let's have that in mind during the whole presentation, because that's a key factor, but it's a global one. So just to start with some macro indicators, it may seem simple, but it's a strong message. I would like to start with the inflation. And I personally never saw such a low, probably all of us never saw such a low inflation in Brazil. It's a consequence of many years of a good job being done by our central bank. But the reality is that today we can combine this unique scenario for Brazil with a low inflation and low interest rates. Again, it may sound obvious, but for a country that has lived in the last, I would say, foreseen history with 8, 10, 12% real rates, when we speak and discuss markets on a 2 to 3% real rates, it's almost an experiment. We don't know the consequence of that in our entrepreneurial environment, in the business opportunities, but that's very powerful. And we just add there the TLP, with BNDS interest rates, showing that the subsidies are over. Also, a quick snapshot on our GDP. We had our recession. It's over. We are still, I would say, a modest growth, but already in the blue line. So we don't expect the growth to peak and have hikes like we did in the past with the exogenous fiscal stimulus, but we expect this growth to be resilient, step by step, but being a long-term one. And the markets are already reacting to that. Equities at the highest, risk Brazil premium at the lowest since 13-11, and markets is agreeing with this reading that I just mentioned. Under this positive macro scenario, I would like to remind and detail a little bit our economic agenda. It's a very simple picture that I like it very much, where we show the 5 pillars that since the election has been discussed and is in execution. The first one is the social security reform. 1 year ago, when I was discussing with Salute my move, probably all of us here will be surprised to believe that we could reach a 900 billion reais saving in less than 1 year anniversary of the government. So this is the first pillar of our agenda. It's moving very well, and I would say above the expectations looking 12 months backward. It's a critical one. The second pillar is the trade liberalization. Here we have an example of the EU agreement that we just signed after almost 20 years of discussions, and we are now engaging in different bilateral agreements across the globe. This is a very good opportunity for Brazil in this geopolitical environment where countries are closing their doors and we are opening ours. So again, this is a relevant change for our country, and the agenda is moving and moving fast. The tax reform. This is the next big chapter on the legislative agenda. Not only on the revenue side, but mainly on the simplicity and bureaucracy cost. This can also be transformational for Brazil. We have a very complex tax systems that I would say scare some foreigners investors and create inefficiency and low productivity in our companies. And the potential simplification behind this reform is also huge. Again, this is moving fast as well, and that will be the next chapter in our Congress agenda. Also very supported by our key leader in the Congress as well. Privatizations and divestments, I will speak a little bit about that later, because that's one of key BNDS functions. And lastly, the public, I would say, reform. It's a challenging one, but again, a very relevant one for our country as well. And we still think that's doable during this mandate, during this government. That will simplify a lot the way our public machine works. So that's in a nutshell our economic agenda. The message here, it's a strong and transformational agenda, and it's moving fast. And lastly, I think this is the most important, I would say, transformation that our country is facing, and it's a very deep one, which are the cultural changes. I grew up in a scenario where we learned to be apolitical. And today we see our population in all levels, like poor people, medium class, high-end people, discussing, debating, and being active in political discussions. And that's something, I would say, recent, but also very powerful. The biggest example, the biggest recent example we have here is the protest in favor of the social reform. People went to the streets asking to cut their benefits. It's not something, I would say, easy to imagine or reasonable to predict. But our population, that historically has been apolitical, went to the streets asking for the bigger benefit despite the individual, I would say, costs burden. So this political active of our population is something that's a cultural change that's really powerful for our country. Second one, we have a more mature democracy. Our institutions, they are stronger as they never been. We have today an executive power that plays as a team without political nominations. So I built my team in BNDS or in the secretary as I built my team in BTG or Pactual, choosing my guys, choosing my directors, and making them aligned and working for Brazil. And today, on the other hand, you have a Congress that's playing the Congress figure. I mean, it's not nominating a lot of seats on the executive, and it's leading a protagonist role in the legislative agenda. So I would say that our democracy in Brazil has never been so stronger. Of course, this is like this must be a practice. It's not something that to achieve and it's there. It's like cutting our hair. We need to do that every week and keep reinforcing. But I would say that's those are two big changes for our country. And lastly, it was a painful way for our country with a lot of unfair actions. But the reality is that all the corporate enhancement that we had in the last years permitted our public and corporate sides to have better levels of governance. So I think those cultural changes in our countries, they are as important or more important, and they add up to the macro environment and to the transformational economic agenda. And that's why, that's the environment that I saw 12 months ago. And again, that's moving stronger, faster, and more in the right direction than even myself I thought. And how BNDS is playing a critical role to make this agenda perform. Just a quick snapshot on the bank for those that are not familiar with. We are one of the largest development bank in the world, roughly $126 billion portfolio. An equity portfolio at Bndes par of around $27 billion. We're going to explore that more later. Very comfortable equity and Basel ratio, so liquidity is not, and capital is not an issue for the bank. And we are wholly owned by the federal government, and that gives us a key advantage that I will explore later. The lending activity in BNDS is being there for 6 to 7 years. It's well done, it's operational, it's well performed. It's the incumbent business at the bank. But in the last 15 years, through, I would say, oversized, subsidized lendings, the bank has, I would say, missed a little bit its true purpose. The bank became a little bit egocentric in the sense that his job was to disburse money, to lend money. But actually, the job of this bank is to develop our country, is to improve people's life, is to have a better social environment for our citizens, is to have a better environment for our forests. So the purpose of BNDS is the development, is to improve our country. The tools the bank can use are the lending, the credit, and they use it quite well. And we are adding now the service arm, a service portfolio where we want to be an investment banking for the Brazilian state. We want to add the services capabilities together with the lending tools to perform development in our country. That's why we call that BNDS now should be more development and less lending. So we can focus on the impact on we have on the life of the population and the true needs of our country. And how do you want to play this? What's our portfolio of services? We can offer privatizations, as BNDS did in the late 90s, divestments, concessions and PPPs, help states reorganizing their finances. And again, it's not something truly new for the bank. In the 90s, the BNDS executed a critical role on this relation with the Brazilian state. And the reality is that our clients, the state, they don't have money. Sometimes they're not skilled. They don't have time. They don't have tools to perform such a big divesting program. When we come with our technology, with our people, balance sheet, with our brand, we can be very helpful for the country, for the government in this, and I say 10 to 15 year divesting agenda because it's a very big pipeline. We'll still keep our lending tools. That's an important one. We have a long-term BRL funding, stable funding that can and should be used to help our country in infrastructure, in sanitations. We have a very active on-lending SME business. And we should support with our balance sheet any initiative where we can replace public services through private investors, through private hands. And lastly, we are investing money and time on this, what we call the project factory, which I think is a critical bottleneck for the development of our infrastructure today. And we'll speak more about that later. And just on the right side of the slide, there is a chart that I like very much on this balance between our equity portfolio of Bndes par with $27 billion, and why do you think this is not a business for development banking? This is a speculative portfolio. It's compounded by very good and well-managed companies. We think they are very nice companies, but making speculative investments on the secondary markets is not the purpose, is not the mission of a development bank. We should use this resource, time, people, money, to invest in sanitation, to invest in environmental solutions. We're going to start soon a divesting program of the Bndes par portfolio. We're not committing to time, to amounts, but the message is that by the end of the government, I would like to have as close as to zero on those what I call the speculative positions. I think we still can keep an ability to invest in equity in companies with two principles. It must be transitory. It's something that I help a company, and once the company is mature, we should get out, again, because we're a development bank. And second, you must have a development purpose behind that. And why do you think BNDS is very well positioned to play this role? Why we think only BNDS can perform such a job in such a scale in Brazil today? First, because, again, we are here to help the country. We are here for the development. We are not here just for profits. Of course, we should pay our bills. We should burn our costs. But our priority is to work, develop, and find financial solutions to help our country. The profit is after that. It's just a way of sustaining our activities. We have neutrality. Being a federal agent, we have neutrality. We're not here to compete. We're not here to compete with private banks. We're not here to compete with political, say, appearances. We're here to help all the agencies involved in this process. We have a lasting presence. BNDS is compounded by public servants that are here for 10, 15, 20 years. When dealing with governments, it's important to have this long-term view. As a federal institution, BNDS has advantages to hire, to trade, and to make agreements with the Brazilian government. When a private institution is dealing with government, you have two risks. You have the governance risk, naturally, in Latin American countries such as Brazil, but also you have like the lack of skills, what I call risks. The client in the Brazilian government sometimes doesn't understand how to price, doesn't understand financial instruments. So BNDS, using its neutrality, using its financial skill, wants to be and will be the bridge between the Brazilian state and the financial community. It also adds value to the regulatory bodies. Instead of supervising many different states or ministers, centralizing all the hub of divesting in one single entity, such as BNDS, will simplify the task and do performers to make improvements and to improve the process along the way. And lastly, BNDS has a unique country knowledge. The bank is here for 6 to 7 years, has a knowledge about how to move and how to deal within the Brazilian government and the financials behind that. So that's why we think that we, BNDS, really can play a critical role in the divesting program of Brazil. And that's our mission here. And just to end and reinforce our strategy, I like very much this hourglass picture because it simplifies in a visual way the message here. So on the bottom, you have what we call this investment banking for the government, where our mandate is to increase the base of this hourglass, mining, finding, and structuring more opportunities across our country. On the top, you have our balance sheet capabilities, where we need and we want to act as a catalyst. We don't want to compete with private lenders, with private capital. We're here to support, to help, and use our balance sheet to act as an inductor to bring private capital, both domestic or external, to Brazil. And in the middle, we have this bottleneck, and I think that's the biggest bottleneck we have in our country to develop our infrastructure. Good projects, well-planned, well-measured, well-designed, with environmental, engineering, contracts, traffic analysis. That costs money, that takes time, and as you know, and as I said, our client doesn't have money to pay that, and BNDS is willing to invest money on this project development, of course, as a revenue source as well. So this is a summary in a very simple visual way of BNDS strategy in the next 10 to 15 years, in our view. And just to finish, a quick snapshot on our pipeline of concessions and privatizations. And the government created a new organization. The federal government created a new organization in 2016, which is the PPI, Programa de Parceria de Investimentos. It's been very well succeeded, and it acts as a BNDS partner within the government. In a nutshell, they organize the political agenda, they organize the formulation agenda, and we execute on the operational and financial side. It's been performing very well since 2016, and its council, it's compounded by ministers and the presidents of the federal banks like myself, and we should meet between 2 and 5 times a year to approve the priority of privatizations and concessions. It's a very well structured, even for global standards. So I invite you, all of you, to follow the PPI minutes and to have full transparency on what's on the agenda for privatization for the next years. On this year, we had a divesting target of $20 billion It's on the right side of the page, from which we already concluded roughly 19. So we should overreach the budget. And main assets that were divested were the Petrobras assets, TAG and BR Distribuidora. And we created the first true insurance corporation in Brazil by exiting the government participations through Banco do Brasil, the federal government, and Caixa Econômica. On the left side is a snapshot of our Bndes par portfolio. And as you can see, it's highly concentrated in 5 big names. I wouldn't spend much time here, but I would like to present how big is the pipeline. So in the power, the next big agenda should be the privatization of Eletrobras, should be coming to the Congress in the short time. In the oil and gas, in November, we have a $25 billion auction for the excess oil of the pre-salt. We have a huge pipeline of highways, railways, both urban and interstate. Airports, it's already in progress and should be performed until the end of this mandate. Ports, real estate with a new agenda with forests and parks on there as well. The Brazilian government has never invested deeply on divesting from its real estate stock, and that can be really big. City solutions, like street lighting, traffic lighting, prisons, housing, waste management. We're working on this agenda to be, I would say, introduced strongly, I would say, deeply after the municipal elections in Brazil next year. Finance, we have some small caps, medium companies in the finance sector that are on the agenda to be privatized. Technology, and water and sanitation, that's a key agenda for BNDS and for the government. And many other sectors, such as communications or our post and mail company, Correios, which is a big elephant. So, to finish here and go for the debate with Mr. Guarda, which I'm very willing to start. We presented today that we have the biggest pipeline of divesting assets from a government globally. I cannot confirm 100%, but I'm really confident that that's the case. We also presented BNDS strategy as a catalyst for this process. So my request to all of you investors is that when dealing with Brazilian state, please use us. Don't hesitate to call BNDS and use our service. We'll play a neutrality role. Of course, we need to charge something because we have costs to be burned. But the idea is that we charge something neutral, and our goal, our mission, is to develop the country. And we don't care who kicks the ball when the goal to be made. And lastly, just reminding the key message, in my perspective, that we're living a lifetime moment in Brazil to be an entrepreneur in this country. I decided myself to be an entrepreneur in the government. But you, all of you investors and executives of the company, I think you are very welcome as well to take advantage of this unique window, be an entrepreneur, not only financial returns, but helping us to have our Brazil perform this transformation with its culture, with its environmental, with social and economic. Your money, your activity helps the country, and you are very welcome to do so. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to talk with Montezano. Just to let you know, you can download the app to ask questions. So I have the iPad here. I can ask some of the questions you're going to send to us. Before I have many questions, Montezano, but before we start, let me ask a more personal question. You mentioned your motivation to work for the government. So after almost 9 months, you also had an experience as a special secretary for privatization at the executive branch. Now you have 2 months at BNDS. How has been this experience? How challenging, how difficult it has been compared to what you expected before moving to the government.
You know that quite well, right?
Yes, I do.
So it's been a great opportunity. I mean, it's been a great experience. I would say that Guard is being better than I expected for two reasons. First, I would say the lessons we learned, how we grow as a citizen, how we grow as a professional. Second, because the purpose of working for our citizens, working for our country is something very unique. And I'm sure that you felt that on your years in the government. And we as a country, as a culture, I think we grew up dividing our country like between public and private, black and white, rich and poor. And I think going forward, and if you see this country, the US as a country, it's very common that a lot of people move from one side to the other. And I think both myself and yourself can be a case that more people follow, because I think that by moving across the bridge, we enhance our country, we enhance our culture, we have more knowledge about private markets, we bring a lot of contribution to the government as well. So far I'm being very pleased for that.
Very good. And what about the difficulties and the resistance? Because sometimes we know what we want to do, but it's much more difficult to implement than what we expected. At the private sector, it's easier to do things. How have you deal with these difficulties to implement what we want?
Meditation, patience. I think that when we're dealing with the private sector, especially at BTG, we discuss a lot of what to do. 90% of the time is what to do, what's the best decision, what's the best trade. Moving to the government, I think what to do is kind of, don't take me wrong, but it's kind of easy. The challenge is how to do and how to execute things in a proper governance, things that we can prove later on that were done in the good faith, and also a lot of patience and meditation, because things, they have their time, and sometimes if you push too much, you commit, I would say, unreversible mistakes. But I think we are happy with the speed. I think we're happy. Naturally, there is a sense of urgency. All of us, we want things to move fast, but we cannot break the car, right? You cannot break the car. So better to be speeding up slowly, but with cautions, with serenity, but in the right direction, without committing the long term. And the transformation that we're bringing into the way the machine works is very deep, right? You live it there and you perform the part of this transformation. But having a more efficient government, having a more efficient public animal is something that both operationally and culturally it's a long-term job. But the more I move into the public side of our country, the more I see that you have a lot of rooms to be more efficient.
You mentioned the sense of urgency, and of course, growth is one important issue for everyone. As you all know, Brazil had this very tough recession, and since then, since 2017, the growth has been around 1%. So the government, the new administration approved important reforms like the Social Security reform, pension reform that we are approving. It's launching a very comprehensive privatization program. But the question everyone is asking is how Brazil is going to grow. And you I believe, now in a very privileged position to see what's happening with particularly the real sector, or all the sectors that interact with Bndes. So my question to you is, where do you expect to see this growth coming from? If is there any specific sector that you think could lead this growth going forward?
Yeah, naturally, when we speak about, I would say, employment and activity, especially in our country, it always comes to, I would say, construction, not just a real estate like apartments, but a heavy civil construction. So the infrastructure agenda is a key one. There are many opportunities on our country to invest on that turns the car in the short term. And our biggest challenge is this transition from public to private, because in the past years we've been used to this public motor running the economy, and we have to transit now to the private one, to the private engines, which are much more efficient, make a much better capital allocation, but we have this time transition. And the challenge is to combine this economic transition to the political one, right?
We know that with lowering interest rates, financial capital markets in Brazil will change completely. And they will play a much more important role for financing infrastructure going forward. So my question to you is how BNDS can help to develop capital markets and speed up this process? What's your role? What you can do from now on?
Yeah, I think the first thing is not to compete. So it's a soft line. When are you competing or not with lenders or private lenders? But philosophically speaking, we should be here to act as a catalyst and to help where the private lenders cannot act. For example, water and sanitation is a key area that today we can't find or can't confirm that we have long-term funding. Some other long-term BRL credits are also not, I would say, fully served by the private capital. But I think what can you add as a tool, and that's something, again, that's not new. A lot of multilateral banks out of Brazil, they do that, is working with different financial tools rather than the plain vanilla cash, like guarantees, like liquidity buffers, like taking just the construction risk, like mini perms. So we can add on our portfolio additional small tools where we protect part of the risk and not necessarily be the sole lender. And by doing that, we can, I would say, incentivize the private long-term capital.
You mentioned water and sanitation, and this is one of the sectors that I think Brazil desperately need more investments. It's also an issue of public health because the conditions are not acceptable, the type of conditions for water sanitation we have in Brazil today. So this also is related to the discussion with the states, as you mentioned, as several of these companies belong to state governments. There is a legislation being discussed in Congress nowadays to improve the private sector access to water and sanitation. So let's talk more about this sector and particularly about SEDAI, because it's under BNDS responsibility to privatize SEDAI. This is a commitment that the state government has with the federal government. If I'm not wrong, the deadline for privatization is December or November next year. So this is something that has to start right now, and BNDS is leading the process. So my question is, how do you see the SEDAI privatization process going on? If you expect to see other state governments involved in the privatization agenda of the water and sewage sector?
Okay, let me start with the macro view, and then I move to SEDAI. And the more I know this water and sanitation agenda in Brazil, the more sad I get, Guardia, because on one hand, you have investors willing to invest in Brazil on this agenda because, as you said, it's environmental, it's social, it's health, it's economics, everything. On the other hand, we have 6,000 children, Brazilian children, dying every year because they don't have sanitation in their homes. 6,000 per year. What's missing in between? I have investors willing to perform the development, and I have the needs. It's a political challenge. It's the political bottleneck. It's the political agenda. Because the water and sanitation, it involves the federal, state, and municipal levels. So it's probably the most complex, I would say, legislative agenda when we speak about infrastructure. And the reality is that we're facing that for many years. And we still have a terrible, shame situation in the sanitation of our country. At this moment, we have PL, I don't know how to translate that, but a PL in the Congress to discuss the
legislative bill.
Say that again?
It's a legislative bill that's
legislative bill to the Congress to discuss that. And that's a key one. And what I'm trying to sell, and not to sell just to the politicians, but to the populations, is that sanitation should be the next social pension reform. Every mayor that is elected next year that does not commit to sanitation in its municipal city should not be elected because it's a matter of political solution. So we as a society should claim and ask for our politicians to get an agreement. I think we're close to that. We're very close to that. But once we solve this legislative bottleneck, I have no doubt that the demand from investors and from good projects they will come. BNDS has
Do you think the project that is in Congress right now will be enough to deal with this?
Yes.
issue?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a very good one, by the way. Of course, you have all the political risk when dealing the bill through the Congress, but as we are today, we're in a good stage. And to your point, I mean, the pipeline we have in BNDS today is around 8 states to be privatized. But again, we are holding it, or we are waiting for the bill to drive the right direction. And that's the same for SEDAI. SEDAI will have a few models that you can do both a PPP or you can privatize the asset. But depending on the regulation we have on our hands, we can choose one or the other way. The asset is a very, I would say, interesting one. It's a stable, and once you have this legislative step cleared, we can move fast.
And do you think the state and the company is committed to the privatization program?
Yes.
Because this is also an important issue. Because
Yes.
if they are not, they can postpone the process.
Yes. Again, when you speak to a mayor, to a governor, or to the minister, everyone wants to make it happen, but they cannot easily reach an agreement in the middle term. Who stays with how much? Because you have naturally some economic discussion behind that. But both the mayor and the governor, they are committed to that.
Good.
But again, it's hard to commit on something that you know that can change, if depends on the regulation. So it's a chicken and egg question. As soon as it's resolved, I think we can move fast both in SEDAI and other 5 states.
Montezano, let's continue with privatization. You had this experience as the special secretary for privatization and investment during the initial 6 months of the government. As you showed here, there is a very comprehensive agenda, a lot of companies in the pipeline. So my question to you is, what can we expect this year, next year? Which are the priorities? Because one of the things I learned by working at the public sector is it's very difficult to do everything at the same time. So you have to prioritize. So in your view, which are the priorities for this very comprehensive privatization program?
Yeah, the next relevant legislative agenda will be Eletrobras. The transaction will not be concluded this year because once you approve the bill, then you start all the works for the capital raising, and I would say that that's the most critical one in the short term. On privatizations by itself, I wouldn't expect any on the first year of the government. I think it's normal. We shouldn't, as I said, speed it too much. We should start seeing small companies being sold or privatized in the first half of next year. And then semester after semester, we increase the speed and the quantity of deals. But we have this emblematic deal with Eletrobras in the short run. And I would say the second one that's already under analysis is the mail company, our post company. And it's a more complex one because we involve not only the mail itself, but all the universal coverage that you have across the country, and we are a big country. So it requires a little bit of analysis and discussions on the model that we want to pursue. Of course, you have a lot of other, I would say, blue chips that are not on the table, that are off the table for, I would say, political reasons. But we still expect that there's a chance we can do something bigger in this government.
Let me return to Eletrobras. I think Eletrobras is a very good example of the importance of this privatization program. The company is responsible for 1/3 of the electricity generation in Brazil and 50% of the high-tension transmission. And as we know, the company is over-leveraged. They don't have the capability to invest. And if we don't privatize, it's clearly will become a bottleneck for economic growth going forward. So this, I fully agree, it's one of the priorities. My question to you is, and as you said, we have to approve the Congress approval for the privatization, but we are also, if I understood correctly, you're keeping in the similar model we had last year, which was the capitalization of the company. So my question to you, what has changed in the privatization model?
Overall, the model itself is very similar. The way you are going to split Eletronuclear and Itaipu is a little bit different. But conceptually, the model is simple. And as you said, it's not just a privatization for the sake of, I would say, raising funds, but privatization to save the company. Because if you don't capitalize Eletrobras, it will be hard to see the company being competitive looking forward. As you mentioned, like high debt, inefficiency. In the world that technology is evolving, more and more the state-owned companies will stay behind. And I think that the most critical one on this sense will be the post company, as I said, and maybe even Banco do Brasil. And going to the state company, to the mail company as an example, you have two businesses inside the Correios. One, which is the post business, with some monopoly, but some monopoly that loses money, have negative cash flow, because you have the obligation to cover the whole country. On the other hand, you have the e-commerce delivery, which is a very competitive business. And little by little, Correios is losing its market share. And our main concern is if you take too long to free up Correios to be a competitive company, it can be too late, given the speed and the type of innovation we are seeing in this industry. And then we the citizens here, can stay left over with just the bad part of the company and missing the opportunity to create some value or save some cost for us. And I think a similar rationale we can apply to Banco do Brasil. In the world, a lot of bankers here know quite well how tough it's been this technology environment for being competitive in the financial markets. And with all the regulations that we have in the public sector, and they must be like that for governance reasons, it's hard to be competitive in the long run on the technology evolvement.
So let's talk more then about state-owned banks. So you mentioned that this downsizing the public sector is one of the priorities. I think we all here agree with the agenda. But particularly with state-owned banks, I'm talking about not only BNDS, Banco do Brasil, Banco do Nordeste, and Caixa Econômica Federal. In your view, what's the role of these state-owned banks? So what can we expect with respect to this front?
Yeah, just to be clear, they are all off the table today. So none of them are in the list for privatization, just to be clear.
Their role in this process going forward?
I think we need to split, right, the figure of a retail bank from the figure of a wholesale bank, this development bank. The needs we have for BNB and Base are because they have the constitutional funds. So both of them they do own lending to this constitutional fund, and that's their reason for existence. And you can argue if we may have a different alternative or not. On Banco do Brasil is a commercial retail bank. As I said, I think Banco do Brasil will struggle to compete in the long run with the private sector. We'll do it to all things that we already mentioned. And Caixa has this social agenda that is the hands of the government in the last mile, being used as, I would say, an operator of our social policies. On the BNDS case, we're positioning ourselves as this development banking. Again, not competing with private capital, not competing with investment banking. And I think BNDS, I would say, financial size can be smaller, but the impactful potential of the bank can be higher, just by being more, I would say, coordinated and working with the different agents and helping the private capital rather than competing or crowding out the private capital.
Let me use the Banco do Nordeste as an example. Banco do Nordeste has a very interesting operation in microcredit. This is not related to the constitutional fund, so that's not a legal obligation for the bank to keep this activity. And I'm sure this is something that the private sector may have a lot of interest. So do you see this type of strategy going forward, I think, to spin off part of the business and to transfer to to the private sector relate to the activities that are not directly involved with the constitutional funds?
Yes, absolutely. I think not only Banco do Nordeste, but many public banks, they have an agenda of, I would say, spinning off different business. Banco do Brasil started doing that a few years ago, and was very well succeeded. And the agenda likely will move in this direction, rather than, as I said, as of today, the privatizations of those banks are off the table. So the best way of making them more efficient is by, I would say, spinning off different business. And the Banco do Nordeste microcredit is a beautiful business.
Another opportunity.
I was very impressed when I learned this business. I had no idea that you had such, I would say, small Jew.
It's very interesting.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
I had the opportunity to see this operation. It's really very interesting. Another big opportunity you mentioned that, and we will see that by year end, is the auction related to the pre-salt excess oil. So this is, in my view, the importance goes much beyond the fiscal impact. And this has a very positive fiscal impact, not only for the federal government, but also to now in states and municipalities, the government is going to share the revenues. But my question is, when we look to think about growth going forward and all the investment that will be associated with this auction, the question is, how much money probably will be invested in this opportunity, and how long it's going to take to see the investment really coming in? Because this can have a very important impact on the overall investment in the economy.
Well, to be honest, I'm not the best one to speak in details about this oil concession program, but I understand we're speaking something about 700 to 800 billion reais of investments along 10 years. But the most important thing there, I think, is the message that I just mentioned here, that this government is executing things fast. This excess, sessão onerosa excess, has been on the table for many years. The company couldn't agree something with the mining ministers and with the treasury. As soon as our minister was stepping in, he arranged the working group, and I would say in less than 6 months they were able to find an agreement. And that's a very important message and signal about how much opportunities we have like that in our country. That's just a matter of aligning the interests in the purpose of having something good for the country, not just it's good for state-owned company A and Minister B. And I think it's a very well done job by both ministers, Mr. Bento and Mr. Guedes. And hopefully we'll have a very successful auction on the 6th of November with 100 billion reais plus concession fees.
Last question related to oil and gas is there is this new agenda to deregulate the gas sector. So I think this seems to be a very important agenda. So what can we expect from that? What's the rationale and what's really happening in this sector?
Yeah, we have a very good problem ahead of us on this gas industry. We're probably to be, I would say, we're excessive producer, I would say net producer of gas in 2025, if you keep our current status quo. That creates a burden because you need to reinject the gas, and that's inefficient, costs money, and you are just wasting energy potential. So the agenda here is to create additional ways of using and consuming that gas, both in the industry or auto or retail sides. It's a big agenda for the government. One big step that we may soon also reach on the congresses is to take out the limitation of power companies to be owners of gas distributors. I didn't know that, but power companies in Brazil, they cannot own gas distributors in different states. So the idea is that we remove out this limitation and likely have more competition to do the investments on the gas distribution. But the two key components that will likely use the gas will be thermal, like generation power, and the industrial one, like a special industry that can consume the gas. But looking at the total figures is not an easy task for us as a country because it's a lot of gas. But again, that's a good problem.
This will demand probably a lot of investment in infrastructure, gas pipes. Is it correct?
Correct. I mean, the big investments will be gas pipeline from the São Paulo and Rio or Espírito Santo. We have the two options. But numbers are something between $5 to $10 billion just on the pipelines itself, without taking consideration the on-land distribution that we can invest. But hopefully, I would say in a few months, we should be seeing the behavior of the gas price, already pricing future deliveries of the gas. So I will not tell numbers of reduction because we have different opinions, but likely the potential reduction of the cost will be very, very material. I was quite impressed when I saw the numbers.
Montezano, we all know that the public sector in Brazil does not have money to invest. Investment has gone down significantly. The government recently made very clear that they are going to keep the spending cap, and in my personal opinion, it's very important to keep with the gradual fiscal consolidation approach. But it means that in the short to medium term, investment will have to come mainly from private sector. So let's move to discussion about the concessions, railroads, toll roads, ports. You mentioned that there is a pipeline, but talk a little bit about the timing of these initiatives. If is there something that we can expect for the beginning of next year, the end of this year? What's the timeline for these important initiatives?
Okay, on the port side, we are already running the Codesa privatization. We started 2 weeks ago, or 1 or 2 weeks ago, if I'm not wrong. And we think that it can come to the market next year. And then on top of that, we have more 6 potential privatization of docas, Companhia Docas.
Okay.
Not the port itself, it's docas. And the biggest one will be the Santos. And we're still discussing that will be a IPO or a full sale. But Codesa will be our I would say, study case for this. And I think across the first half of next year, we may have a view on the Codesa one that will drive the solution for all the other 7 one. Let's say Ceará, Piauí, Natal, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and let me forget an additional one. And the other one that you...
Railroads.
Railroads, we have 2 privatizations of city lines, which the Porto Alegre one, which is Transurb. That's a very healthy one. It should be kind of easy to be done. I think that can take between 12 and 18 months to be executed. It's already running, so second half of next year. We have a more complex one, which is like CBTU, which is presenting 5 cities. We're not so sure that all the 5 cities, they are economically viable, so it can be a mix of privatization, concession, and let's say rethinking the model on different cities. It's just as a number, and I'm not so sure that all of you know, just for CBTU plus Transurb, we as a citizens, we pay 1.5 billion reais per year for them to be running. 1.5 billion per year. And we have been paying that for decades. And the question, why is still there? Because no one took the hard decision to move it to the market. On the rails, we have a very challenging opportunity with the Ferrogrão one, which exits Mato Grosso to the north, including Minister Tarcísio is here in New York this week, speaking with investors to see if there's appetite for that. It's a not obvious one. Capex there, something in the levels of 15 billion reais, but it's a very, I'd say, challenging due to the demand of the bean producers. I cannot remember all of them, but the agenda is quite big.
As you mentioned, Minister...
sorry, there is the Caetité line that will go through Bahia until the Transnordestina. We have the auction probably in this first or second quarter next year. It's a line that will go on the iron ore company in Caetité until I think it's Itacaré or something in the seaside of Brazil. And that will be a very emblematic one as well.
You mentioned Minister Tarcísio Gomes, and the minister, if I'm not wrong, was here yesterday. He was talking to investors, presenting the pipeline we have in Brazil. And also, if I'm not wrong, he is also considering the possibility of using the green bonds. So this is a big market here in the US. In Brazil, if I'm not wrong, we issued less than $6 billion in green bonds. And I think most of the projects you have could be considered by the Climate Bonds Initiative to get the certification to issue the green bond. Is it something that you really think it's feasible? We may have money coming from these green bonds for infrastructure projects in Brazil?
Actually, Sergio is here from BNDS, but the first week I was announced as BNDS CEO, I had the luck of being awarded the Green Bond Climate Initiative. So I joke at the bank that that was my first deal. So 1 week after I took the seat, BNDS was awarded to be stamped by the Climate Bond Initiative. So we as a bank, you already have this line available for us. It's a matter of now delivering that. And I do think that we should and we must look for this, I would say, different capital agenda. And I think BNDS is well positioned to raise all those type of different monies. And the alignment that we have today with the minister is that BNDS should not issue unsecured funding. We don't want to compete with our treasury, with our sovereign in the curve. In case BNDS needs more clean money, it can be capitalized again by the treasury. But the agreement today is that we should only search for funding that cannot be raised by the treasury. So those type of impact bonds, green bonds, social bonds is something that we should focus on. And this initiative of the Green Climate One, I was lucky that, again, just after sitting there, I received this gift, and I'm anxious to start using this.
Good. Montezano, I cannot avoid to ask this question as we are talking about the green bonds. We know that recently there has been a lot of noise in Brazil and internationally with respect to the Amazon forest. And the BNDS is the official manager of the Amazon Fund. It's a fund set up to prevent, to monitor, and to control deforestation. So my question to you is, what has been BNDS' role in this front? What's really happening there? What kind of message could you convey to us about what the government is doing in the Amazon region?
Sensitive question. Okay, let's go. So BNDS, first, we are the manager of the fund. So we are the operator of the fund, and we've been doing that for many years. And the bank is also recognized by its innovative efforts on this agenda. And what's happening today, and it's a discussion between our clients, when I say clients are both the government and the quota holder, which is mostly the Norwegian government, is that they are discussing the mission of the fund. There's a kind of, they were not full aligned on how the fund is being used. And what's the critics for those that think that the fund can be better used? They think that it lacks a kind of macro strategy. And there's a lot of small initiatives across the Amazon, like 2 guys here, 5 guys there, 1 small initiative there. And they say that it really does not have a full impact on its potential, so that the fund can be much better used if used like with a clear mandate, I would say narrow scope, but very impactful, right? That's the critics, those that I'm not saying my position, if I agree or not, just to be clear, but those are the critics. And on the other hand, you have demand for investors and for people to donate, because the money is fully granted. It's not even low returns. It's a fully close to $1 billion grant to our country. And we still think, and that's the message, there is still even more money to come if you find a solution. So on one side, you have investors that are willing to keep the money and even increase the amount. And it's not a surprise, given the last news we had about our Amazon forest in the last 2 weeks. So the the topic became even, I would say, hotter. So we see demand to keep the money, and they want to keep the money and even invest more. On the other side, there is I would say, a constructive critic or point of view that the money can be better used to have its potential. We, as a service provider, would love to keep the asset. I think it can be really helpful for our country. We're prepared to make it happen, to keep executing. Of course, we have things to be improved, of course, as all of us here in our business we have. But in my view, Guardi, I think we can make from this lemon a lemonade, to be honest. Because when I speak to both the Minister of Meio Ambiente and the Norwegian ambassador, everyone wants to help our forest. I think it has a potential to evolve the fund, to come, not a new fund, but a renovated fund. And also when I speak to potential different investors, we have more people willing to do this kind of investments. So I would love to make from this lemon a lemonade and come out with maybe, hopefully, a bigger fund with more, I would say, powerful impact. Let's see. Let's see.
Just remind everyone, if you have questions, you can use the app and send it to me. If you don't, I still have more questions. I can continue here forever. So while you think, let me ask maybe the last question. We are running out of time. But it's you mentioned tax reform. I know it's not your responsibility. I know the government will send the proposal to Congress. But my question to you is, looking to capital markets and the role that you and Mr. Guedes, they want capital markets to perform going forward, how we can use tax reform to help capital markets to develop its role. For example, I remember on our conference in São Paulo, the governor of the central bank, Roberto Campos, he was talking about the taxation of derivatives. If you you want to hedge a position, the taxation is very inefficient in Brazil. They were talking about changing this. What else could be done to foster the development of capital markets in Brazil, in your view?
Yeah, as you said, it's not my mandate, yes, so I must be very careful here on comment other people's job. But that's under Roberto Campos' agenda, together with the new Secretary of Receita. And roughly you have two big topics. One is like foreign investors taxation and how to make it more even on the financing side, that foreign investors, BRL or USD, can enjoy the same level of tax competitiveness that the local investors they have. And the second one is the hedging taxation. And BNDS is involved in this agenda because it can be a new tool that we will be able to provide to, again, catalyze the moving of private capital to infrastructure out of Brazil. But those are the two big topics.
Okay. If we don't have questions from the audience, I'd like to thank you very much, Montezano, not only for the presentation, for the discussion here, but for all the good work that you are doing. It's really very important to have people like you working for the public sector. I know how tough it is, how difficult it is, and how dangerous it is to go there and to try to do the things that we believe. So I think I can talk on behalf of all of us here. Thank you very much for the great work that you and all the team are doing at BNDS and at the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Pleasure. Thank you.